of now and will be available for distribution later, most likely posted to our website within 36 hours. The slides and poll data that you will participate in today, along with several good articles, will be shared after today's session. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Douglas Reeves to introduce our guest today. Doug is the founder of Creative Leadership Solutions and the author of more than 40 books and 100 articles in education, and just truly an influential man in education, and an honor to work with you, Doug.
Well, that's very kind of you, Tony. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy to have such a large crowd on a Friday. And as Tony said, this will be recorded. So if you have colleagues who would like to listen to what Kim has to say today, as well as view the outline and the articles that we're providing, please share these ideas with as many people as you wish. The articles that you'll have, as well as the slides, are free. A few words about Kim Marshall. You know, all of us will at some point in our career say, well, you know, I was a good teacher, I was a good principal, and so on. Kim is going to be able to say, I influenced education in 50 states and 74 countries. Truly a remarkable impact on education because he curates the best of the best research that is out there. Moreover, Kim has personally been a veteran teacher, principal, and district administrator, and his role today is really synthesizing all the information that's out there to tell us how we can best prepare for the fall of 2020, probably the most challenging opening of school in any of our professional histories. So with that, thank you, Kim, for joining us. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. So in this week's Marshall Memo, I think that's how most of you heard about this. I just casually mentioned that I had put together a webinar on going back to school, and I thought maybe a few people would respond. So there were several hundred responses on Tuesday morning. And so Doug and Tony kindly offered to host this and to set up the logistics of this, which I'm very grateful, because I could never have done that myself. So Doug has given a brief bio there, and as you know, I have been for the last 17 years doing the Marshall Memo every week with a couple of weeks off in the summer. And Doug was an early supporter, I'm glad to say. He was somebody who saw the virtue of the Marshall Memo early on and helped to spread the word just by word of mouth. So I've been, of course, covering the coronavirus crisis and also the racial justice issues of the last few weeks in the memo. And I've put together some ideas, none of them really original to me, which I want to share with you this morning, although I know that there's at least one person in Hawaii who is with us up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So hats off to you. And just hats off to everybody here, because there have been such heroics done by educators around the world. My daughter is a 7th grade teacher in Boston, and what she's had to deal with kids at home, 2 young kids at home. Our son is a high school history teacher in Seattle, what he's had to deal with under a lot of pressure to deliver the goods every single day. And then there are educators who've lost family members, who've lost colleagues. I was talking to a principal in New York City the other day who had lost 2 teachers in her school. And so now we've got this nationwide awakening, and I think that's the best word for it, on racial justice going on too. So it's a lot going on right now, to say the very least. And we're all thinking about the fall. And my wife works in the Massachusetts Department of Education, where they, like every state, is in the process of figuring out exactly what kind of guidance will there be. So a lot of balls up in the air. So let me find my cursor here. And if you could please grab your cell phone. If you don't have a cell phone, we have different directions in a minute, but grab your cell phone, go to your texting feature, okay? Go to texting feature, and you're gonna put in the message, excuse me, in the to box, I'm trying to find there, you're going to put 37607. This is so you can respond to the questions that we're going to be asking throughout this hour. So in the to box, write 37607. And then in the message box, the message you're going to send is Kim Marshall 346. And it's not case sensitive. Don't worry about capital letters. So 37607 in the to box, Kim Marshall 346 in the message box, then hit send, okay? And then you will be registered. So that will get you registered for the questions that we're going to be asking. And if you don't have a cell phone handy, you can also use a computer or a tablet. Just go to a browser and put polev.com, Kim Marshall / Kim Marshall 346, and then you'll be able to use a laptop or a tablet or even a cell phone. So that gets you registered. So let's start with our first question here, which is, what is your role? And I know we got people all over the world here, and let's just, if you can put in on your cell phone, just hit the letter that describes your role. So go ahead and put that in, and we'll begin to see these coming in here. You can see, again, hundreds of people. There are 297 people on this call right now. And you can see the roles coming in here. So it looks a lot of principals so far. Just take another 15 seconds. Just hit the letter that represents your current role. I know you may have more than one, but let's just go with the principal, with the main one.
And as those are rolling in, Kim, looks like you have participants online today from everywhere from New York to California to Minnesota and Oregon. We've got most of the states covered, it looks like.
Oh my goodness. And I hope the Hawaii person's alarm clock went off. Okay, so that gives us a sense of who's with us. Mostly principals, a lot of teachers, a lot of school-based administrators, a few counselors, psychologists, a few superintendents and central office people. So that's who's here. So now we have a word splash question. If you can think the 2 words that describe your state of mind now. Okay, so just type in somebody. I think I answered this on the previous question, but on this one here. So for example, mine might be sad and determined. So just 2 words, and they don't have to be opposites, but go ahead and type them in on your cell phone keyboard. Hit send after each word. And as you know, with these word splashes, when the word is repeated more than once, it gets bigger. So let's watch this as it develops here. Let's take another 25 seconds to kind of get your thoughts in here. This is just a little bit of a sanity check. By the way, Tony, I don't know if you put the directions for logging into Poll Everywhere in the chat box. So if there are any late arrivals, they'll be able to see the 2 things that they put in.
I will get that up there, and a few are responding in the chat. So some of the additional responses you have coming in via chat are anxious, worried, enraged. Oh man, I empathize with that to some extent. Saddened, overwhelmed, hopeful while concerned.
Wow. So in the word splash, anxious is certainly the biggest one, along with overwhelmed and hopeful. Hopeful, that's positive there. We've got uncertain is a pretty big one. Stressed, confused, unsure. Wow. So we're going to save this. Take another 15 seconds, just get your words in, and we'll save this, and you'll be able to sort of look at maybe with a little more time here. What's uncertain, concerned, eager? Wow, a whole lot of emotions here. Okay, so this kind of sets the scene for what we're talking about. And again, I'm not the guru on masks and sanitizers and that sort of thing. That's going to be handled by health officials within each state, each province, each district, each school. But I think what I want to talk about more is the educational piece. Wow, we still got responses coming in here. So these are 4 articles. Tony mentioned that we're going to send these out to you. These are 4 articles on the issue of uncertainty, confusion, and the first one is one of my favorite articles by Barry Jensen and Jerome Murphy. Can a leader admit confusion and still lead? I did a Marshall Memo summary of this article. I can send this to you, or somebody's going to send it to you. We just want to mention these quickly now. These are all great articles for leaders who are in the midst of this crisis. Okay, so now just one more poll question before we dive into the substance here. What would you like to see the plan be for your school for the coming year? What is this is, if you were in charge, what would you want to do? Because in the end, teachers and principals, superintendents, parents' opinions are going to be very, very important. In our State Department of Education here in Massachusetts, the policymakers are hearing a lot from superintendents, from teachers' unions, from parents, others, and the bottom line is, of course, being safe, but also being educated. So it looks like our biggest vote getter so far is it depends on the health data, and things may be different in August and September than they are now. That's the biggest one, but a lot of people want to reopen fully, full opening with social distancing, and these are some of the options that we're hearing about, staggered. So we're hearing from the precincts now. These are some strong opinions here, but look at that bottom one there. Is we're going to be watching the data. And I think that is what's going to be really paramount here. Okay, so what is your school's #1 issue? We've got hundreds of schools represented in this webinar. What are the, think about the 1 or 2 words that are the biggest. And this is the first word splash was about your personal opinion, but what about your school? What is this school's #1 thing? Think of 1 or 2 words and think about that. And then we're going to have another word splash here to see what is the 1 or 2 words that sum up. And don't use the chat function. Use the Poll Everywhere function here to find out just quickly, what are the main issues in your school? Safety is a biggie so far. Community achievement, planning, gap, the gap that's going to exist. Equity is a biggie now. That's something that's the coronavirus shown a very, very bright spotlight on that. So take another 15 seconds, get in your 2 words, the biggest concerns that you have, and we're saving these. And any folks who arrived after my initial directions, go to the chat function and you'll see the directions of how to log into Poll Everywhere, which we're using here for these questions. Equity, safety are just overwhelmingly the biggest things here, but we have lots of other issues here too. That pretty much sums it up. Equity and safety. Okay, so let's move on and get into the substance here. What have we learned during this crisis? And we have discovered an entirely new art form. These amazing, done by students, done by professionals, done by faculty members, the ability in a Zoom call. And if you haven't seen this one already, I linked this in the Marshall Memo a few weeks ago. Definitely go to YouTube and click out Juilliard Bolero. It's an extraordinary work of art. And this is something we just didn't have before. And this is a brand new art form. And then we have things like this. This is Oprah Winfrey's gathering of a number of prominent African-American intellectuals, preachers, writers and thinkers and politicians. And she conducted this thing, which I also linked in the memo. You can get this on YouTube. So this is also new. We didn't have anything like this before. So my first bucket here is what I picked up in my reading for the Marshall Memo and from my children, from my wife, and from friends who are in this business of what have we learned that we can do better. Let me go through these, and then Doug is going to chime in, and we would like you to chime in if there's anything missing, or if you want to draw me or Doug out on anything. So the first one is sleep for high school and middle school kids. It has been a true blessing for a lot of adolescents to get enough sleep. And school districts, I think, are getting a very strong message that if they're not already opening from 8:30 on, they really should. Now, my daughter's school opens at 7:15. So I hope they're getting the memo on this, because the research is very clear on this, that high schools and middle schools should not open before 8:30 in the morning. And then while we're talking about scheduling, flexible scheduling within the day, because I think we've also realized during the coronavirus crisis that not every kid has to be in every class. And the flexibility that we've learned how to use during this era is something we should be doing. So the second one is team collaboration. A lot of teachers have been forced into or twisted into working much better with their colleagues during this with Zoom calls and so forth. And they've also learned how to centralize the information on families, and the idea of a point person in every school who is the point person or in every team who has all the information on families. So I think when we go back, and by the way, this is going to be over, but next year, 2021, we're going to be back in a normal thing when the vaccine is thing. But we've learned going forward for the fall and for the future to team collaborate better. The third thing is, I think we got a much better understanding of what works better in person, and we miss it dearly. We miss that in-person contact, but we've also learned that there's certain things that are done more effectively and more efficiently online. And so I think when we go back, we're going to be balancing these two. When is the in-person, the actual charisma of the person, the relationships and so forth, that comes with all the body language and everything, when's that best? And when is it really much more efficient to do a Zoom call, to do flipped teaching, which we kind of knew about before, but it was fairly rare. So that's the third one. The fourth one is checking for understanding. Now, there's already some of the, when I'm in classrooms that I visit, and I visit hundreds every year with the principals that I'm coaching now, one of the weakest things that I see in many classrooms is not effectively checking for understanding. Saying any questions and silence and moving on. So I think with remote instruction, we've learned that the checking for understanding has to be more efficient, more for all the kids, and that's where polling comes in. So by the way, if any of you have not used Poll Everywhere or a similar program, I have directions for Poll Everywhere. I've learned how to use it. And you can see that it's quite magical. So to be able to check in more effectively, I think a lot of us have had that message, if we didn't already have it, reinforced. Differentiation. So again, with huge differences in internet access, with differences in support, differences in all these other things during the coronavirus, I think we've learned a lot more about differentiation. And I push back on the traditional content process product way of thinking about differentiation. I think about UDL, Universal Design for Learning, really good lesson plans, open access to the maximum number of kids, nimble teaching during the actual act of teaching, whether it's remote or not, actually responding again with that checking for understanding. Somebody needs to mute there. And then the follow-up afterward, mostly done by teams. So more projects, performance tasks, and experiential learning. Another big lesson. Again, many people were doing this beforehand, but we've learned and become much more cognizant of the need to get kids working independently on projects, performance tasks. Comments, not grades. One of the big, and Doug Reeves is going to chime in on this one in a minute, I know, because when you give a grade to a kid for a performance or for anything other than a straightforward quiz, the kid looks at the grade and doesn't look at the comments. So we got to get into comments and really eliminating grades from a lot of those things. More outside speakers. My son, David Marshall, out in Seattle teaching history, has discovered a lot of people who are willing to chime in on Zoom virtually, artists, speakers, politicians, policymakers, thinkers, professors, and so forth. So I think that's another thing we've gotten a lot clearer. Next to last one. So I just have to tell a little story here. So a few weeks ago, there was an article in the New York Times by an 8th grade girl in New York City public schools who said that she preferred the online learning that was going on during the crisis because her classrooms in her school were out of control. Kids were rolling around on the floor, fighting, screaming. The teachers were not keeping their kids on task. And that, I think, is a failure of classroom supervision and evaluation. And as many of you know, I'm a big advocate of frequent informal visits to classrooms, and that principal knows who he or she is, and it should not have been an issue so this girl was not getting taught in school. So I think my mantra there is don't let mediocre teaching practices fly under the radar. Get into classrooms more. And so principals have just got to get out of their office, and assistant principals. And then the final one, stepping back from all this, is the big meta goal here of the school is getting kids to function independently, because we've had a crash course on that in the last 3 months. But that's got to be a meta goal for the future, is really keeping our eye, not doing too much of the work for kids, but actually getting them toward that long-term goal of being independent. Okay, so I blitzed through that. So Doug, please chime in with your thoughts, questions, pushback, and then in the chat room, please, would our participants here chime in?
Sure. So there we go. Just two quick things. Number one, it seems to me contradictory for people to say that safety is their number one goal and then insist that we really have to start the school day at 7:15 on account of football practice. The evidence clearly is that schools that have an 8:30 late start, and that includes such institutions like the U.S. Air Force Academy, that I think is pretty rigorous. When you start later, you have better health, better attendance, and in other districts, fewer automobile accidents. So if you care about safety, the late start is part and parcel of that. Secondly, with respect to grading, I don't want to hear anybody say that we have to do the average, because nobody in the world used the average, that is, including missing assignments for March, April, and May this past semester. We've now demonstrated that we don't have to use the average in grading, one of the most simple and immediate improvements we can make in grading policy.
Wow. Two powerful messages there. And Doug, you're really an expert on especially on the grading issue. So Tony, do we have anything coming in the chat room, people reacting to this first list here of things that we can do better when we go back? Anything missing from this list?
So a couple of comments coming in. Big challenges for K2, especially when students are in care of non-parents. And Doug, in agreement with you about the need to end the average.
And also Faristo, to my friends in Greece who are on here. You have an international audience.
Fabulous. So anything else in the chat room?
Challenge in getting all students to attend or engage in remote learning, which is likely to be one of our options.
Yeah. This is Doug. Let me just offer one quick thing. I think the check for understanding that Kim mentioned is critically important. And here is something that the biggest mistake we can make when we do, and it's when, not if, when we do go back to school, is to say, well, thank God that's over. Now we can go back to what we were doing. One of the real lessons learned is effective checks for understanding never happen with a 30 or 45-minute lecture followed by, anybody got any questions? Or everybody with me? what we've seen in the virtual environment is egg timer, 3 minutes of concept, 3 minutes of small group or individual work, 3 minutes of random checks for understanding, not any questions, but really digging beneath the surface. That's good practice virtually, and it's going to continue to be good practice in the classroom.
One quote that I used in a memo a couple of months ago was from a British educator. I don't have his name at my fingertips, but he said rather than asking, for years he had been asking, are there any questions? And to which he got silence. And then he started saying, ask me a question. And it completely changed the dynamic. So simply, but also using polling, just using poll everywhere, some method, clickers, some method to check, like, do all these kids really get it? Or are there some silent confusion there? So Tony, anything else in the chat room?
Open the floodgates, Kim. Try to spotlight a couple trends that I'm seeing in here. Questions or comments regarding higher order thinking skills when students have open note assessments.
So not a blind test, but open book. Is that kind of assessment?
That's how I'm interpreting the comment. Yes, sir.
So really putting your learning to work as you would in the real world. Great idea.
Another question, requesting thoughts or starting remote learning at the beginning of the year for very young students, pre-K.
Now that's going to be a tough one. My sense, at least here in Massachusetts, that if any kids are going to be back in school full time, it's going to be the elementary kids. And I'm hoping, and we have a grandson in kindergarten here in the Boston Public Schools, I'm hoping that will be the case. They may be more spread out. They may be in groups of only 12 kids. They may be using the cafeteria and the auditorium and other areas of the school to get the group size down. But I'm hoping very much that the elementary kids will be in. And Doug, what's your sense on that? What are you hearing around the country and the world?
Let me offer some feedback I've actually heard from students, and that is you have students who were completely disengaged, not necessarily due to lack of access to technology, but maybe the technology was there, but they were fighting for bandwidth with parents and 3 siblings, or as Kim said, because school was starting at 7:30 and they weren't out of bed yet. In any event, here's the feedback that I've had from students. If I was really attentive and distance learning worked really well for me, don't necessarily assume that's my preference. In fact, what some of them said to me is, does that mean because I was successful in a virtual environment, I'm going to be punished by being the last to go back to school, and the kids who are not successful are going to be the ones who are live? The social element, being around friends, participating in extracurricular activities is part of why I like school. And if being really successful in a virtual environment means I'm going to be the last to come back, they'll figure out that game very quickly.
Wow. Tony, any other comments from the chat room before we move on?
Frankly, more than I can keep up with, Kim. We've got a lively running conversation in the chat. Great discussion going on. Resources being shared as we go through here. But I think a couple of themes that I'm seeing are around the rhythms of education in virtual space, the need to identify priority standards, the need for professional development around blended learning, and in many comments, the need to strengthen and pay attention to relationships.
Just one other clarification for the 3-minute rule. I learned this from a science teacher, actually, and I think it applies from little kids all the way to college students. And that is, rather than the award-winning 30 and 45-minute lectures, egg timer. 3 minutes present a concept. And if you can't present a concept in 3 minutes, you're probably overcomplicating it. Present it. I don't care if it's the quadratic equation, Boyle's law, or how to make an A in kindergarten. 3 minutes at most. Ding, the timer goes off. 3 minutes.
We've certainly violated that rule here. So Tony, are the chats going to be saved for people to look at later?
They will be saved, and we will figure out how to export that and distribute them as well.
Excellent. Okay, so let's do a quick poll on the list that I just shared. And we've already had some suggested additions, but which of these might be on your list? And you can choose as many as you like. Just hit the letter on your cell phone. Not in the chat box, but on your cell phone. Just read down the list and hit any letters, as many as you like, that would be on your sort of list of your wish list for when school reopens in the fall. So look at these responses coming in from all over the world. So we got a bit of a horse race here, but so far, Better Checks for Understanding and polling is way out in front. I think in second place is Better Team Collaboration and Family Information. Take another 15 seconds to get any responses in that you think would be on your priority list. Well, the loser is when in-person remote works best, which is interesting. That was sort of a hobby horse of mine, but clearly not at the top of people's list, maybe because you think it's so obvious. I mean, we just kind of know this already. Okay, just wrap up, another 10 seconds. We're gonna save these. Very striking that Better Checks for Understanding is way out in front, just really doing that. And again, in the classrooms I visit, I see wonderful checks for understanding, and then I see weak check for understanding, and that you end up paying the price for that. Doug, any reactions to what we're looking at here?
Sorry, I just needed to, I've been trying to be a good citizen and mute myself when I'm not participating. You know, it's not necessarily an either or proposition, but I will tell you that teachers are kind of overwhelmed with advice when they get walkthroughs. And so if I could pick one thing that I would like them to do better, it really is checks for understanding. And I try to do this with gentleness and respect, but as I said earlier, only rookies say, anybody got any questions, or everybody with me. Professionals always dig deep and see if what the students know and what they don't know.
Mm-hmm. And then use that information to tweak the lesson or to move on or to try something different, to abandon the lesson. I mean, I think that's the real trick here. Okay, so let's move on. I want to mention that those of you who do not get the Marshall memo, I'm offering free subscriptions during the COVID crisis. So just shoot me an email, kim.marshall48@gmail.com. And also on the website, if you haven't already seen this, there is a compendium of all the information that's come in so far on teaching in the COVID era. And this is just this week's up-to-date list. And this is now 57 pages long. So if you have a friend, an educator friend, who just got back from the space shuttle, or who's been on a retreat for the last 3 months, this is a good way to catch up. So look at the categories here. They're wonderful quotes, including some from kids. Articles on understanding it, including this wonderful article by Erin Bromage, this Massachusetts professor who helped us to understand how this works. So we have a much better idea now of how to be safe, which is really important. Articles on the human side of online learning. A lot of good articles by teachers, principals, and professors on that subject. The pedagogical issues of online learning, specific suggestions, videos, free children's books, online teaching, tech resources, troubleshooting with Zoom. And the last section is a couple of things that I put together over the years when I was a 6th grade teacher, and since then, including a summary of Guns, Germs, and Steel, the Jared Diamond book. So all that is available for free in the outer area of the memo. Okay, so now we got our second list, which is before school begins, what are things that educators ought to be thinking about? And this is my personal list, and we're really open to ideas, things that are missing here in discussion. So let me run through it quickly first. Hiring. A lot of people are going to take early retirement or leave. And I've got clear data on this. There's going to be some vacancies. And we're going to want to find the people who are right for those vacancies. So the hiring process, and by the way, in the Marshall Memo archive, there are a ton of good articles on hiring, interview questions, and so forth. The other thing is tutors. There are going to be some college kids graduating who actually don't have a job and who want to serve their nation. And one of the best ways they could serve their nation would be to tutor in a school full-time. Okay? Get in there and work with groups of 1 and 2. There have been some good articles by Robert Marzano at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore about the best kind of tutoring, the tutoring that works, real high-impact tutoring. So that's number 1, hiring tutors. Number 2 is looping. So if ever there was a time for teachers to move up with their kids, this is now, because they know what was happening during the virus, they know where their kids are at, and they can move up with them and accelerate them, and they have those relationships. So I think looping is a prime thing, and I have to say that for our kindergarten grandson, in kindergarten in Boston Public Schools with a wonderful kindergarten teacher, it would be just so cool if she moved up with them. Now, of course, with looping, you've got to have a good teacher, and there's some personality issues that might have to be tweaked, so not going to be 100%, but I strongly urge people to think about looping, and I know a lot of people are. The third thing is forming effective teacher teams. And just yesterday, I was on a call with a school here in Brookline, and they talked about the hidden leaders, the teachers who have been kind of on their own, singletons, working in isolation. And during the virus, they kind of came out of their shell. And so forming principals, strategically forming teacher teams that will really work well together, perhaps novices and veterans. And then this came up in yesterday's call, the issue of the lonely singleton, okay, the physics teacher who's the only physics teacher in this medium-sized high school. And we've learned how to do Zoom chats. We've learned how to do Google Hangouts. And so wouldn't it be wonderful if that physics teacher, all by him or herself, lonely, reached out, maybe through Craigslist, found 5 or 6 other physics teachers in the geographic area, got together with them on a regular basis with Zoom or Google Hangouts and talked about physics, gave common assessments and so forth. The fourth thing is power standards. And I believe, Doug, that you were the inventor of this term. But if ever there was a time going into the 2021 school year to figure out what are the most important things for kids to learn, it's now. And so sitting down, again, this is before the kids arrive, before we get started, is each team figuring out what are the most important things for kids to learn this year, and really narrowing it down to the key things. Next one is professional development. This came up actually in one of the chats just a minute ago. Teachers sharing what worked and what did not work, because maybe there's going to be some part-time, maybe we're going to have a relapse and go back to remote learning. So we've got to share those best practices to make sure that every teacher knows those best practices. Finding the lost students. There was a New York Times article about a Philadelphia classroom, I think a first grade classroom, where only 40% of the kids were participating in the online learning. Oh my goodness. So before school begins, finding those kids, whether it's going to their houses with safe mask wearing and so forth, and finding out what was going on there. Is it internet access? Is it family issues? And getting them re-engaged. So when we come back, we got 100% of the kids. And then the last one is obvious, is we've been working on this, is the equity issue of every kid has a device. Every kid has robust internet access. Okay, so Doug, chime in, and then please on the chat function, put in anything that's missing here, any questions or anything where you want more detail. So go ahead, Doug.
I would just add one thing, and that is with respect to filling vacancies. I know that many of you mentioned you have hiring freezes, but we still are losing a lot of people. And I also think we're not ready for the fact that 29% of our teaching corps is over the age of 50 and may be very reluctant to come back to a school that whatever we do is not going to have social distancing. That said, the other thing that we need to think about is that people who used to get their clinical experience in the spring and then become as student teachers and then become our rookie teachers in the fall, they didn't get that experience in the spring. And so I'm really encouraging schools not to have just a mentor that talks to them every few weeks. They need to have a 2-on-1 defense, somebody every day talking about curriculum and assessment, maybe another colleague every day talking about classroom management, parent communication, because they missed that critical clinical experience in the spring of 2020.
Wow. So Doug, talk a little bit about power standards. If I'm remembering correctly, there were 3 criteria for what constitutes a power standard. Can you refresh my memory?
I will, and I'll just say this is a district and school issue because you cannot expect state and provinces and ministries of education to deaccumulate. They're always in the process of accumulating more. We at the building and district level have got to deaccumulate. The 3 criteria are, number 1, leverage. For example, nonfiction writing helps students in math, science, and social studies. Number 2, endurance. You see the same standard reoccur year after year, like argumentative writing in grade 4, 6, 8, and so on. And the third is essentiality, simply sitting down teachers and saying, I'm in 6th grade, you're teaching 7th grade. What do I need to do this year to send students to you next year in confidence and success? They never say cover every standard. They always give you a list that's brief and focused.
Wow. So, and the ultimate compliment that one teacher could give to another, that 7th grade teacher could give to the 6th grade teacher, is your kids were really well prepared. And when they walked in or when they came in remotely, they were well prepared. They were ready for 7th grade. That's the ultimate compliment more than anything else. Okay, so Tony, anything coming in the chat? Questions? Additional
So a couple of trends that I'm seeing. Number 1, things that we should pay attention to centering around social emotional learning and needs of teachers and staff members. Need to pay attention to that. Also, the concept of power standards, well received, lots of very positive comments about how that work has been very liberating for teachers and some of the best professional development that teachers have participated in.
Hmm. Oh, I just wrote down the social emotion for the staff. Yeah, how are you doing? What's going on? Did you lose family members? Or are you fired up and ready to go for this school year? That's a very important thing that I will add to my list. Any others? Anyone else want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, so scrolling back up through a couple of requests for recommendations regarding articles for various topics. So I've suggested that folks email you for those requests. Need to develop independent work habits when we return and prep for the need of shifting to remote learning potentially later in the fall. Scrolling through.
Now, I have gone on to the next slide. Sorry, Tony, I jumped the gun. So you keep talking, but this is the top 3 priorities. So this is before school opens. What are your top 3 priorities with your cell phone or your laptop, whatever device you're using with Poll Everywhere?
I thought about districts sharing service with looming budget cuts. Is there a possibility that we could explore that? Have you heard, Doug or Kim, heard anything about districts partnering with each other to fill gaps?
Wow. Doug, anything on that one?
Well, just to say that rural schools have been doing this for a long time. And just this morning I was on with a regional group in Wisconsin where they've got 21 small districts, the largest of which is only about 1,600 kids. And they routinely pool ideas and resources for special education, for professional development, and so on. So we've got some really good patterns out there of sharing. And I think the virtual environment has also encouraged cross-boundary collaboration.
Mm-hmm. So I think everyone's worst fear is the budget cuts, and I think we're looking at this with a very wary eye here. So let's look at these results here. These are the top 3 priorities. So people were limited to only 3 responses for this. By far the biggest one is power standards. Wow. And then there's sharing effective practices and finding the lost students. Almost nobody for looping. What's up with that? I mean, I'm a huge looping fan. When I was a principal, I eventually, after years, convinced our kindergarten to first, our second to third, our fourth to fifth. So that does not seem to be top of mind for a lot of people. Surprising. Okay, web technology for all, forming effective teacher teams. But the biggest one of all is the power standards. So cutting those standards down, not trying to do everything and finding the most important things. And then, of course, backwards planning, using a good backwards planning unit design and thinking that through. Fascinating. Okay, so.
Lots of reaction, Kim, if I may, to looping in there. I think the sense from the audience is that generally they're in favor of it, but for various reasons, from school structure to directives from superintendent, looping is not an option.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so it was not something that I could mandate when I was a principal, so I had to convince people. And of course, there's some teachers who don't want to do it because you have to learn a new curriculum. But every teacher I've talked to who is looped says that it is an incredibly positive experience, and the kids say so too. Of course, the teacher has to be good, has to be willing to do it, and somebody has to be willing to come back down. So for example, if my grandson's kindergarten teacher goes up to first grade with her class, then those first grade teachers have got to go down to kindergarten, so that might be some of the resistance. Okay, enough about that. Let's move on. So the third list, and there is a third and final list here, which is, okay, once school begins, what are the key priorities? And I would say one of the biggest things is just, we can't hug them in person probably, but just a big warm welcome to the kids and how much we miss them. And then a big thank you to families. I was driving through Newton, a suburb near where I live here in Massachusetts a few weeks ago, and there was a caravan of teachers going around to stopping at all the houses of their kids, and just the warmth and the callings out and everything. But when we're back in person, it's going to be huge. And a thank you to those heroic families who handled this situation. The second, and this parallels something that just came up a minute ago, is a social emotional inventory of the students and of who needs mental health support. And Panorama Education, one of the big polling companies, every year offers a free online survey, a confidential survey on social emotional issues. And I will put that on the Marshall Memo, toward the end of the summer, as soon as they have it available. It's a wonderful survey. There are other surveys too, but I think we need an anonymous survey to find out which kids are coming in traumatized, which kids are coming in good shape, which families have broken up, all these kind of data, so that the mental health people in the schools, the psychologists, the counselors, the teachers, the nurses, the principals, assistant principals, everyone can be aware of what the situation is. The third thing is about assessment. Now, everybody's talking about the need to get diagnostic data on the kids when they come back, because some kids have missed a lot, some kids have done okay. So we got to do diagnosis. And there are companies out there, including NWEA, that are offering free diagnostic assessments. And a couple of weeks ago, I called two of the biggest assessment gurus in the world, Dylan William, the British assessment expert, and Tom Guskey down in Kentucky. Both of them, almost with exactly the same words, said the same thing: don't use commercial assessments. Don't. Have teachers write what they call range finding assessments. That is, I'm about to teach this unit on fractions. I'm about to teach this unit on quadratic equations, or I'm about to do Romeo and Juliet. What are the key background knowledge things that I want to know? Do the kids have this or not? What are the skills and so forth? So just short teacher written or teacher team written assessments are by far the best way to assess the situation as we begin to teach. And by the way, the strong advice is to move on, is to not go backwards and, you know, and then do what we're supposed to have done in March, April, May, and June, is to start and then scaffold and support and these range finding assessments. And so I think if there's one thing that teacher teams should be working on, you know, starting in the summer and then into the school year, is crafting those assessments. So they don't have to be perfect, but that's how. The next one is student grouping. Okay, we got this information, you know, how are we going to group kids? I just heard about a school yesterday, I did the webinar yesterday here in Brookline, that said they're going to go away from super tracking. They're going to go from 3 groups to 2 groups. So, you know, moving in that direction. So those are key decisions. How are we going to group kids? And then really a full court press in September and October, just full court press, accelerate the learning, and again, fill in the gaps, and where the biggest gaps are should be the tutoring. So if we have a cadre of tutors in the school, they're the ones who are going to move in and work with those kids who have fallen apart. Although one of the recommendations on tutoring is to not just have it for the remedial kids, have everyone get tutoring. Frequent classroom visits. Again, there should be no excuse for classrooms that are out of control, that are boring, that are worksheet driven, low-level worksheet driven, all these kind of things, is principals and assistant principals getting out of their offices and getting into classrooms, and not to fire people or to get people in trouble or to shout at them, but to give them support and help so that they can teach in an effective manner every single day. And then finally, all faculty sharing. So one of the hangups that I had as a principal, I was a principal of this school in Boston for 15 years, was I didn't have really robust professional discussions go on. And one of the best ways to do that, I've discovered, is to, and I've got a picture of it here, is to actually have staff read an article live. And Marshall Memo summaries are perfect for this because they can be read in 5 or 10 minutes. So everyone has a hard copy, or if it's an online meeting, they have an electronic copy, and everyone reads the article silently together, okay? Then they turn and talk, they're in groups or breakout rooms in Zoom, and they go around with a protocol, and everyone says what struck them, what they disagree with, what quote was particularly good for them. Everyone participates, and then the whole staff comes back together and discusses the action implications. So this is a powerful practice. But again, as a principal, I felt guilty if people were reading silently. I said, well, they should read it beforehand. Well, we all know that when you ask people to read something beforehand in universities and law schools and business schools and in schools, only about half the people do it. Well, maybe in business school, everyone reads it because they have to. But, but having people read it live in the meeting is very powerful. And let me give you one example of an article that I would recommend. And by the way, in the Marshall Memo archive, I have 54 articles that I've designated as good for all faculty, K to 12, all faculty discussions. An article by Jennifer Gonzalez about worksheets. And, you know, worksheets are in every school and every classroom all over the place. And some of them are good and some of them aren't. So Jennifer said it's a continuum between what she calls busy sheets, which are just plain busy work, like a word search puzzle, something really low level and worthless. And then a power sheet, okay, an original source document, something really, really the kids can sink their teeth into. And so reading this article, about a page and a half, and then discussing and having everyone reflect, okay, my worksheets, where are they on this continuum from busy sheets to power sheets? Powerful article. And anyway, enough said about that. So let me just, we'll do a quick poll on this one. I'm curious about this, and then we'll go back and think about that back to school list. So what's your reaction to the all faculty live discussion idea, which is not mine, by the way. I just discovered it recently.
And Kim, as folks are responding there, a couple of trends in questions and chats coming in. Number one, people would appreciate more detail about the idea of range finding / pre-assessments, formative assessments, and second big trend in the chats, what does getting into a classroom look like in a virtual setting?
Oh, my good. Let me start with that last one, and then I'm going to throw the second one back to Doug. You know, with Zoom classes, you can actually, the administrator can actually go in and they can get into the breakout rooms as well. Or, and this was in a Marshall Memo article last week, having the teacher submit a video of one of their, because they're recording them, a video of one of their online lessons. So, but I think keeping it informal. I mean, you know, where school's almost finished now, or is finished for almost around at least the Northern Hemisphere. I think that people really low-keyed. Most people held teachers harmless. But when we start again, we want to make sure that the best teaching is happening in every single classroom for every kid. And so, you know, my whole approach, and those of you who've read my writing about this know, short, frequent, unannounced visits with face-to-face coaching each time on one specific leverage point. That is my mantra. And Paul Bamrick-Santoyo and Justin Bader and other people are sort of along there. A lot of people who are thinking along these lines. Doug, you want to take the one about assessments, about the range finding assessments?
I do, and I'm really happy that you mentioned Dylan Willem's article. That's going to appear, by the way, in the September issue of Ed Leadership, and I commend it to your reading. Why is it that people defer to corporations rather than doing it themselves? Because they fear that every assessment has to be reliable and valid, which means 40 or 50 items takes forever to create, even longer to grade, and they never influence student achievement. So here's the bottom line. You can get what you need on these range finding assessments with 20 minutes, 20-minute reading assessment on grade level, 20-minute writing prompt, 20 minutes in math, 10 items. That's it. That lets me know, can I plan, what do I need to do to plan for today's instruction? The last thing I'll say on this is a lot of things are sold as formative assessment that are what I have called in another article, uninformative assessment. In other words, it's only formative if it informs teaching and learning. So to the administrators on here, before you ask teachers to do something called a formative assessment, ask yourself, is it informing teacher teaching and leadership? If not, it's not formative. Don't spend money and time on it.
So you put your finger on the big hang up there, which is, oh, it isn't going to be psychometrically perfect. And the truth of the matter is that if you're getting ready to teach a 5-week unit on fractions, or a unit on Romeo and Juliet, or a unit, I'm sorry, I've mentioned that twice. I'm hung up on Romeo and Juliet. It doesn't have to be psychometrically perfect. What you need is information that helps you understand where the kid's at as you start to teach this. What do you need to be cognizant of as a teacher? What gaps in their knowledge do you have to fill in so that you can proceed? And then, of course, as you teach, you're also checking for understanding. And Dylan Willing is very big on what he calls formative. As a Brit, he calls formative, which is the on-the-spot checking for understanding. You know, the quick checking in real time. So, Tony, what are we seeing on the chat box here?
Reactions to your comments about one-to-one coaching, lots of interest in finding additional articles through the Marshall Memo website. Maybe worth Kim mentioning your offer again to folks and the website.
And could I just offer one more idea with respect to the assessment issues? Again, from a teacher's point of view, what I need to know is what kids got right or wrong. I don't just need a raw score, which is what I get from typical computerized assessments. If I administered and created the assessment, I know exactly what they got right and wrong. And if you can't give me that level of detail, frankly, it's not worth my time.
And you know, again, the pushback, especially from the testing company officials, might be, well, the teachers don't know what they're doing. They don't have assessment literacy. Well, most teachers can do this, and it really helps when teacher teams get together, when they pool their ideas, so they up the quality of the test. But again, the tests do not have to be perfect. These range finding assessments, they just have to find out the key information, so that as we start to teach this particular thing, and then this goes on throughout the year. Any other sort of items? So, Tony, I think I went by one of them there and didn't catch it.
Yeah, so I'm including your email address and website again in the chat for folks, but many of our participants are interested in digging deeper into some of the articles that you've referenced.
Yeah, so to log into the Marshall Memo archive, you just go to marshallmemo.com, and then if you forget your password, which is often your last name, just email me and I'll look it up and can send it back to you very quickly. But the archive has got more than 8,000 articles. They're all organized by topic, by author. And again, at the very top of the list, the second on the topics list is these all faculty discussion articles. And I went through all 8,000 articles to find the ones that I think are best suited to having a really robust half-hour discussion, 5 minutes to read it, 10 minutes, small group discussion, and then just, it doesn't take a lot of time, but that's a really robust, staff meeting. Okay, so let's look at the polling data here. So we've already done this successfully. Wonderful. 65 people have already done this. Terrific. You're way ahead of me here. But we're definitely going to try it when we're back in school. We tried it and it wasn't successful, say 1 or 2 people. Now, I'm betting that that was probably the quality of the article. Or maybe the article was too long. Again, these have to be well chosen. They have to be the right articles. And then a few other responses there. So let's see where we are here. My cursor seems to keep disappearing here. Come on, cursor. Where are you? There it is. Okay. So differentiation, just a quick thing on differentiation. So again, the canonical wisdom on this is you differentiate by content, process, and product. And many of you have probably heard Mike Schmoker and others really trashing this process and saying there's no research about this and so forth. And differentiation is driving a lot of teachers crazy because they think they have to do a separate lesson plan for every child or for every learning style. And so I think the 3 key questions, and you're hearing echoes of Rick DeFore here, is what should students be learning in this unit or lesson? What are the best learning experiences to get them there? And if you're teaching atomic structure, it's probably going to be marshmallows and toothpicks, some kind of really hands-on thing. That's the best way for all kids, for the visual learners, and as well as the kinesthetic learners and the auditory learners. And then building in the checks for understanding. Are all students learning this? And what that boils down to in a classroom is balancing energy and creativity across 3 phases. The first, and this is very practical, is front loading. Is the actual planning of the unit or the lesson. Just planning it effectively, under universal design for learning, making sure that there are as many on-ramps for as many different kids as possible. Then execution. And I love this picture because it shows the teacher really down with the kid and, okay, this is going to be impractical for a little while, for a few more months, but checking in and constantly tweaking, being nimble. And then the last one is follow-up, which is mostly ideally done by teacher teams, by professional learning communities. And that's the principle on the right-hand side there, checking in with the team, looking at data and figuring out, okay, what worked and what didn't work, and what can we do differently, and how can we improve our teaching, as well as helping those last kids. So we got about 5 more minutes here. Questions, comments, or ideas. We have a few more minutes here with Doug and me and Tony to take anything from the chat room.
Just one thing, Kim, since you mentioned both professional learning communities and Rick DeFore, and here's the intersection between that and social and emotional learning. Everybody just about is used to asking the questions, what do we want kids to learn? How do we know if they've learned it? What do we do if they haven't? What do we do if they have? Those are the 4 questions. I've been advocating question 0. And question 0 is, what do they need in order to start learning? What do they need medically? What do they need psychologically? What do they need in terms of nutrition and social care and that sort of thing? So please don't neglect question 0 as we start. Then you can get to questions 1, 2, 3, and 4.
That is wonderful. And question 0. Have you written an article about that, Doug?
I know I'll add it to the list that you keep telling me to write.
Yeah, and several, ladies and gentlemen, Doug has discussed that question 0 in greater detail in several websites. Several webinars available on our website. So if you'd like to contact me, I'd be happy to point you to that. Kim, it looks like you've inadvertently stopped sharing your screen. So if you
yes, I did, so that I can see people, and I see Jeff Schwartz there. Good to see you, Jeff, and Aurelia, and Madeline, and Christina. So go ahead in the chat box if you have any follow-up questions or suggestions, because we want to make sure that this keeps getting better.
Hot topic is the idea of teacher creation of assessments with lots of pros and cons going there, ranging from quality concerns to time concerns to differences of assessments to level of rigor when the district creates those assessments for teachers. So Kim and Doug, you all can continue to weigh in on that. That seems to be of great interest to our audience.
Doug, go ahead on that one.
Yeah, I do think level of rigor is important, but it's we always have to ask the question, who is the audience? The audience isn't just some ineffable third party. The audience is the student and the teacher. Is it going to tell me how I can be a better teacher? That's the #1 thing. So don't over-engineer these things. And as Kim discussed earlier, It doesn't have to even be a traditional assessment. Those checks for understanding. Hey, I'm so happy you got the answer to this problem, but can you tell me how you got from steps 2 to 3? I'm so happy you used these citations, but could you tell me another citation you thought about using that you didn't use? Those are deep checks for understanding that you don't get when all you see is a score.
Perfect. I couldn't say it better myself. Other things, we got about 3 more minutes. Want people to get their money's worth here, but wait a minute, this is free. Okay.
Oh,
What else is popping up in the chat room?
Well, can I just say that since 57 minutes have been free, Kim is being too modest not to mention he's already offered a subscription to the Marshall Memo for free. But if you want to narrow the focus and have a great study this year, the best of the Marshall Memo is published volume 1, volume 2 coming out in a few months. But in Amazon, or please, for goodness sake, ask your local independent bookseller who's been dying on the vine for the best of the Marshall Memo. That's a wonderful book, available in hard copy, hardback, and paperback. I really recommend it.
And ebook as well. Thanks for the plug, Doug. Okay, Tony, any other questions?
So again, yeah, the idea of assessments is resonating. There was a question that I just scrolled by. I apologize, I have lost it. Question 0 is resonating. Here we go. Any insights on how to plan for difficult discussions related to ongoing social issues?
Social issues as in, how are you interpreting that question?
I believe I've seen several other references to protests after George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement.
Of course, yeah. Wow, this is, I think, a real tough one for especially high school, but to all levels. I mean, we got a lot of traumatized kids here. I think the good news is that there is an amazing awakening happening, and that was the cover of Time magazine this week. Awakening happening. I mean, it's not like this hasn't been going on for 400 years, but all of a sudden, people are paying attention. And the amount of fabulous writing and talking and thinking and like Oprah Winfrey's symposium and just all these other things that are going on. I'm in the middle of Time magazine's issue on this. I mean, for just to pass along to kids and to staff members, just what is being discussed, because we are taking this all apart now in a way that I don't think we ever have before. This is quite extraordinary. I'm trying in the Marshall Memo to keep up with this. For example, in this week's issue, those of you who've gotten to this, and I know how busy you are, there's an article about saggy jeans. I don't know if you saw this article, where in a high school, this administrator is called over to a classroom, and the teacher is berating this African-American boy for sagging his jeans, showing his underwear, which is not in the school dress code. And so she takes him to the office, and on the way to the office, they pass 4 white boys who also have saggy jeans, and nobody is saying anything to them. So this kind of unconscious, non-malevolent, unconscious bias that goes on all the time. And I think just an article like that is just a wonderful example of how we can become more aware. Now, of course, a lot of African-American people are saying, like, how slow can you get? But we're getting it, we're listening. And there's a lot of wonderful reading. In last week's Marshall Memo, I listed about 40 books. And I don't know if you noticed, the New York Times bestseller list is heavily populated, I think almost entirely populated by White Fragility and Kente's book and all these other amazing books and TED Talks and everything else that's going. So we're listening. But back to the question is working with kids who want to protest, who want to violate social distancing and all that kind of stuff. These are tough school-based questions, but the main thing is to just show that we're listening, to not be in denial.
And if I can just offer a couple of footnotes. Number one, if you like the webinar format, next week, Dr. Anthony Mohammed and I are going to be addressing this issue on equity. And if you're on this, I'll make sure that you get a invitation to that webinar with Dr. Mohammed. Secondly, I've produced a series of scenarios that I think is really important for us to talk about, because it will allow us to, with one another as educators and as administrators, see if this conflict comes up with students, with parents, how shall we handle it? And there's a scenario in there, for example, on student plays of the last hours of George Floyd's life. There's a example of what if students want to do a Blue Lives Matter, and so on. Finally, of the Oprah video that Kim mentioned is really important. In particular, I want to highlight Professor Jennifer Eberstadt of Stanford, who was on the Oprah video. Her book, Biased, B-I-A-S-E-D, just like it sounds, Biased, is probably the best I've read on this. Final thing I'll say is that we do need to leave room for divergent thinking. There really is opportunity for thoughtful disagreement. And if ever there were a time in our history where we need to model and give students opportunity for divergent thinking and different ways of looking at complex issues, now is that time. So let us not fall into the pattern of whatever is said, we must all agree with, because that's just as bad as racism itself.
Okay, well, we don't want to keep you busy educators over time, so thank you for joining us. We're going to send you the, I will have the link to this in next week's. Bye, Helen. Thank you so much. Be well, all of you, and have a good summer. I hope you're going to get some time off. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Be on the lookout for the slides via email, as well as links to the promised webinar from Doug. Have a great weekend.